The experience of chronic pain in the aging population is frequently misunderstood, often dismissed as an inevitable consequence of longevity or merely the wear and tear of a biological machine that has weathered decades of use. However, contemporary medical science and neuroscience offer a far more complex and hopeful perspective, positioning pain not merely as a sensation arising from damaged tissue, but as a sophisticated output of the central nervous system that is susceptible to modulation. To truly understand the efficacy of meditation as a clinical tool for pain management, rather than a spiritual abstraction, we must first deconstruct the biological mechanisms that perpetuate suffering in the older adult, specifically the phenomenon known as central sensitization. When an individual experiences pain over a prolonged period, typically defined as lasting longer than 3 months, the nervous system undergoes maladaptive neuroplastic changes. The spinal cord and brain rewire themselves to become more efficient at transmitting pain signals, a process akin to a musician practicing a scale until it can be played without conscious thought. Unfortunately, in this context, the body is practicing the sensation of pain until it becomes the default setting. This state of hyperexcitability means that even mild stimuli can be perceived as agonizing, and the emotional centers of the brain, particularly the amygdala, become locked in a persistent state of high alert. This creates a vicious cycle where the anticipation of pain generates stress, which releases cortisol and inflammatory cytokines, which in turn sensitize the nerve endings further, thereby amplifying the very pain the individual is desperate to escape. It is within this physiological storm that meditation enters not as a distraction, but as a mechanism of biological regulation. The skepticism often surrounding meditation in the elderly community usually stems from the misconception that it requires one to ignore reality or enter a trance. On the contrary, scientific literature suggests that mindfulness and specific meditative practices function as a top-down regulatory mechanism. When a person engages in focused attention, they are essentially recruiting the prefrontal cortex, the CEO of the brain responsible for executive function and emotional regulation, to dampen the overactive signals firing from the limbic system. This is crucial for the aging brain, which naturally experiences a reduction in gray matter volume over time. Research utilizing functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, has demonstrated that long-term practitioners of meditation actually exhibit thickened cortical walls in areas associated with pain modulation. Therefore, when we introduce short meditation techniques to older adults, we are not asking them to imagine the pain away. We are training their nervous systems to switch from the sympathetic fight or flight mode, which amplifies pain perception, to the parasympathetic rest and digest mode, which releases the body's endogenous opioids and creates a chemical environment conducive to relief. This shift is fundamental because chronic pain is rarely just physical. It is a biopsychosocial experience where the emotional suffering, the fear, the frustration, the grief over lost mobility, acts as a volume knob for the physical sensation. By severing the link between the sensory experience of pain and the emotional reaction to it, meditation alters the unpleasantness of the pain even if the raw intensity remains initially unchanged. This distinction is paramount in geriatric care. An older adult may still feel the stiffness of arthritis in their knees, but through the consistent application of neurocognitive techniques, the sensation ceases to be a source of panic or despair, thereby significantly lowering the overall burden on the system. The scientific validity of this approach rests on the concept of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural connections throughout life. For decades, it was believed that the aging brain was static, but we now know that neuroplasticity persists well into the 9th and 10th decades of life. This means that a 70-year-old brain is still capable of unlearning the chronic pain loop and learning new pathways of comfort and safety. The 5 short meditation techniques we will explore in this series are designed to leverage this plasticity. They are short because the cognitive load required to sustain long periods of concentration can be taxing for older adults, particularly those battling the fatigue that accompanies chronic conditions. By condensing these practices into potent, manageable intervals, we maximize compliance and ensure that the neurological benefits are cumulative. The first step in this journey of neural retraining involves shifting the locus of control. Chronic pain often strips the individual of agency, making them feel like a victim in their own body. The introduction of structured meditation returns that agency. It begins with the fundamental understanding of the gate control theory of pain. This theory posits that there is a gate mechanism in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord that either allows pain signals to travel to the brain or blocks them. Non-painful input, such as touch or, in this case, cognitive modulation through relaxation, closes the gate. Conversely, stress, tension, and focus on the pain open the gate. Therefore, the techniques we are about to discuss are essentially tools to manually close these neural gates. The first of these techniques, which serves as the foundation for all others, is the practice of breath awareness, but specifically calibrated for pain modulation. In a clinical context, this is not merely breathing deeply. It is the deliberate manipulation of the respiratory rate to stimulate the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in the body, wandering from the brainstem down to the abdomen, and it acts as the primary driver of the parasympathetic nervous system. When an individual in pain breathes rapidly and shallowly, a common unconscious response to discomfort, they signal to their brain that they are under threat, which increases muscle tension and inflammation. By consciously slowing the exhalation to be longer than the inhalation, a technique often referred to as resonant frequency breathing, the older adult can mechanically trigger the vagus nerve to release acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter that acts as a tranquilizer for the heart and reduces the production of inflammatory molecules. This physiological cascade is the bedrock of pain management. It is impossible for the body to remain in a state of high alert pain processing while the parasympathetic system is dominant. Thus, the first technique, breath awareness, is less about spiritual enlightenment and more about biological intervention. It requires the practitioner to become an observer of their own respiration, noticing the cool air entering the nostrils and the warm air leaving, while gently extending the breath out. This act of observation also serves a secondary function, cognitive distraction. The brain has a limited bandwidth for processing sensory information. If the conscious mind is fully occupied with the intricate details of the respiratory cycle, the rise and fall of the diaphragm, the sensation of air friction against the nasal membranes, there is literally less neural bandwidth available to process the pain signals arriving from the periphery. This phenomenon, known as inattentional analgesia, is a powerful tool in the geriatric pain management toolkit. However, moving beyond simple distraction, we must address the relationship the patient has with their own body. Years of chronic pain often lead to a dissociation where the sufferer tries to mentally cut off the painful body part, or conversely, becomes hyperfixated on it with resentment. This brings us to the necessity of the body scan technique, distinct from the breath awareness in its scope and intention. The body scan is a systematic journey of consciousness through the physical form. In a scientific context, this increases proprioceptive awareness, the sense of where the body is in space. For an older adult with chronic pain, the cortical map of the body, the representation of the body in the brain, often becomes smudged or distorted. The brain loses the precise ability to locate sensation, leading to a generalized, spreading pain rather than a specific one. The body scan helps to resharpen this cortical map. By moving attention slowly from the toes to the head, observing sensations without judgment, the individual reestablishes a healthy connection with their physical self. Crucially, the instruction is not to look for pain to fix it, but to simply acknowledge presence. When the mind encounters a painful area during a body scan, the instinctive reaction is to tense up, which is a form of resistance. Resistance creates tension, and tension fuels pain. The scientific approach here is exposure with response prevention. The individual is exposed to the sensation of the pain, but prevents the habitual response of tensing and worrying. Instead, they're guided to breathe into the area, imagining the breath loosening the tight knot of discomfort. This practice of non-judgmental observation reduces the affective component of pain. Studies involving experienced meditators show that while the sensory processing areas of the brain may still register the intensity of a painful stimulus, the anterior cingulate cortex, the area associated with the emotional unpleasantness of pain, remains quiet. This uncoupling is the holy grail of chronic pain management for the elderly. It allows an 80-year-old with spinal stenosis to say, "I feel a strong sensation in my lower back, but I am not suffering from it." This semantic shift from suffering to sensation is driven by neurobiological changes fostered by consistent practice. Furthermore, the body scan promotes systemic muscle relaxation. Chronic pain acts as a stressor that keeps muscles in a state of microspasm, often undetected by the patient. These microspasms restrict blood flow, leading to ischemia, lack of oxygen, in the tissues, which generates more pain signals. By systematically relaxing each muscle group, the body skin breaks this ischemic cycle, allowing fresh, oxygenated blood to return to the tissues, facilitating healing and reducing the background noise of somatic discomfort. This sets the stage for more advanced cognitive techniques that utilize the power of the visual cortex. Visualization, or guided imagery, leverages the fact that the brain struggles to distinguish between a vividly imagined event and a real one. When an older adult vividly imagines a soothing, cool liquid flowing through a hot, inflamed joint, the brain produces neurochemicals consistent with that imagery. This is not placebo in the derogatory sense. It is the activation of the descending modulatory pathways. These pathways travel from the brain down to the spinal cord and can inhibit incoming pain signals. Visualization recruits the visual and sensory cortexes to create a competing reality that can override the pain signals. For the elderly demographic who may have limited mobility, the ability to travel mentally to a place of safety and comfort, a safe haven, provides a profound respite from the confinement of a painful body. This technique engages the right hemisphere of the brain, associated with creativity and holistic processing, to balance the often overactive, analytical left hemisphere that may be ruminating on the diagnosis or the prognosis. By integrating breath awareness, body scanning, and visualization, we create a triad of initial defense against chronic pain. These are not merely relaxation exercises. They are targeted neurological interventions designed to lower the baseline of excitation in the nervous system. As we delve deeper into the specific application of these techniques, it is essential to remember that the aging brain requires repetition and patience. The synaptic connections that have reinforced the pain pathways over decades will not dissolve overnight. However, the science of neuroplasticity assures us that they can be weakened. The use it or lose it principle applies to neural pathways as much as it does to muscle mass. If we stop using the pathway of stress reaction to pain and start using the pathway of relaxation response to sensation, the brain will anatomically reflect this change over time. The gray matter density in the amygdala will decrease, reducing anxiety, while the prefrontal cortex will strengthen, enhancing control. Having established the neurobiological imperative for meditation in the management of geriatric chronic pain, we must now transition from the theoretical architecture of the brain to the practical application of these principles in daily life. The first of the 5 techniques, resonant frequency breathing, serves as the physiological key that unlocks the door to the body's internal pharmacy, and its execution requires more than casual inhalation. It demands a specific, rhythmic precision that directly communicates with the autonomic nervous system. To implement this effectively, the older adult is invited to find a posture of dignity and comfort, whether seated in a supportive chair with feet flat on the ground to ground the nervous system, or lying down if gravity is too taxing on the spine. The practice begins not by forcing the breath, but by surrendering to it, allowing the diaphragm, that dome-shaped muscle beneath the lungs, to become the primary engine of respiration. In many chronic pain sufferers, the diaphragm is rigid, locked by the bracing pattern of pain, forcing the accessory muscles of the neck and shoulders to do the work, which only perpetuates tension, headaches, and cervical strain. The instruction here is to place a hand gently on the abdomen and invite the breath to descend, expanding the belly like a balloon on the inhale and allowing it to deflate effortlessly on the exhale. This diaphragmatic engagement is the mechanical trigger for the vagus nerve. The specific cadence recommended for pain control is often the 4-7-8 rhythm or a simple coherent breathing ratio of 5 seconds in and 5 seconds out. When the breath is slowed to approximately 6 breaths per minute, the baroreflex, a mechanism that regulates blood pressure, synchronizes with the heart rate and the respiratory cycle. This synchronization, known as respiratory sinus arrhythmia, creates a state of physiological coherence where the heart rate variability, HRV, increases. High HRV is a clinical marker of resilience and flexibility in the nervous system, whereas low HRV is associated with stress, inflammation, and rigid pain processing. As the practitioner continues this rhythmic breathing for just 3 to 5 minutes, a palpable shift occurs. The extremities may warm up as peripheral blood vessels dilate, a direct sign that the sympathetic fight or flight system is standing down. It is in this window of autonomic safety that we seamlessly transition into the second technique, the progressive body scan. While the breath stabilizes the chemical environment of the blood, the body scan addresses the somatic holding patterns that lock pain into the musculoskeletal structure. For the elderly individual, whose body may feel like a landscape of various discomforts, the body scan is a journey of reclaiming territory. The narrative guidance moves attention to the feet, often the furthest point from the mind's anxious chatter. The instruction is to feel the sensation of contact between the heels and the floor or the bed, grounding the awareness in pure tactile data. From there, the attention sweeps upward like a warm, scanning light, moving through the ankles, the calves, and into the knees. The knees often hold significant trauma and osteoarthritic history in the aging population. Therefore, when the mind's eye rests here, the goal is not to heal the arthritis instantly, but to soften the tissue around the joint. This concept of softening is crucial in pain psychology. Pain signals cause a reflexive microguarding, a subtle tightening of muscles around the painful site to protect it. Over years, this guarding becomes a source of pain itself, restricting circulation and compressing nerves. During the body scan, the practitioner consciously commands these micromuscles to release their vigil. As the attention moves into the hips and the lower back, the epicenter of chronic pain for millions, the practice invites a sense of heaviness, allowing gravity to do the work of relaxation. It is a process of unclenching. Imagine a fist that has been tightly closed for decades suddenly relaxing its grip. The blood rushes back in, the stiffness dissipates, and sensation normalizes. This is what we are achieving systemically through the body scan. The mind is trained to visit high-tension areas not as a critic saying, "This hurts," but as a caretaker saying, "I see you, and you can rest now." This non-judgmental visitation desensitizes the alarm bells in the amygdala. If one encounters a sharp spike of pain during the scan, the instruction is to stop the movement of attention, hover specifically at the edge of that pain, and imagine breathing directly into and through it, visualizing the breath as a solvent that dissolves the jagged edges of the sensation. This prevents the psychological reaction of recoil, keeping the pain gate in the spinal cord from swinging open further. As the scan progresses up the spine, relaxing the intercostal muscles between the ribs, dropping the shoulders away from the ears, and finally unclamping the jaw, a notorious reservoir of stress, the body enters a state of deep hypometabolic relaxation. The oxygen consumption drops, lactate levels in the blood decrease, and the brain waves shift from the rapid, anxious beta frequency to the slower, restorative alpha and theta frequencies. It is within this alpha-theta state that the mind becomes highly suggestible and ripe for the third technique, guided imagery or visualization. Having prepared the canvas of the body through breath and scanning, We now paint a new reality for the brain. For the older adult whose physical world may have shrunk due to mobility issues, the inner world remains boundless. Guided imagery operates on the principle of functional equivalence, meaning that the brain uses the same neural pathways to visualize an action or environment as it does to actually experience it. To manage pain effectively, the imagery must be multisensory and immersive. We do not merely ask the patient to think of a beach. We guide them to feel the warmth of the sun on their skin, stimulating the somatosensory cortex. Hear the rhythmic crashing of the waves, engaging the auditory cortex, and smell the salt air, activating the olfactory bulb, which has direct links to the limbic system. This multisensory flood creates a cognitive load that competes with nociceptive pain signals. The brain has a limited capacity for attention. By filling the conscious channel with pleasant, safe, and highly detailed sensory data, we effectively crowd out the pain signals. For a patient suffering from the burning sensation of neuropathy, visualization might involve imagining stepping into a cool, crystal-clear mountain stream, feeling the icy water swirl around the ankles and feet, soothing the heat and numbing the nerves. The brain, responding to this vivid simulation, can actually reduce the firing rate of the nerves in the affected area and release endorphins, the body's natural painkillers. This technique is particularly empowering because it provides an escape hatch. When the walls of a room feel like they are closing in with pain, the mind can transport the self to a sanctuary of absolute comfort. This safe haven visualization becomes a conditioned response. With repeated practice, simply thinking of a sanctuary can trigger the relaxation response, lowering heart rate and blood pressure within seconds. The effectiveness of this technique in the elderly is amplified by the rich repository of long-term memories they possess. We can anchor the visualization in a real, cherished memory of a pain-free time in their past, utilizing the hippocampus to retrieve the somatic feeling of ease and overlay it onto the present moment. However, there are moments when distraction and relaxation are insufficient, when the pain is too demanding to be ignored or visualized away. This necessitates the introduction of the fourth and perhaps most sophisticated technique, mindfulness of sensation, often characterized by the process of labeling or noting. This technique represents a paradox in pain management. To control the pain, one must turn toward it. This is often counterintuitive for the older adult who has spent years trying to run from discomfort. Yet, the neuroscience is clear. Avoidance breeds anxiety, and anxiety amplifies pain. In this technique, the practitioner uses the stable platform of the breath to anchor their attention and then gently directs their focus into the center of the pain itself. The critical distinction here is the analytical dismantling of the experience. Instead of labeling the sensation as pain, a word loaded with emotional baggage and suffering, the practitioner breaks the sensation down into its raw data attributes. Is it heat? Is it pressure? Is it tingling, throbbing, or tightness? By assigning these neutral, descriptive labels, the activity in the brain shifts from the emotional centers, the limbic system, to the analytical centers, the prefrontal cortex. When a person says, "My back is killing me," they are engaging an emotional narrative that predicts doom and helplessness. When they switch to, "I am experiencing a sensation of heat and tightness in the lumbar region," they're acting as a scientist observing a phenomenon. This subtle linguistic and cognitive shift reduces the suffering component of the pain equation. This is often referred to as turning down the volume on the second arrow. The Buddhist parable suggests that the first arrow is the physical pain itself, which is inevitable. The second arrow is our mental reaction to the pain, the anger, the fear, the why me, which is optional. Mindfulness of sensation removes the second arrow. It teaches the elderly patient that sensations are transient. They rise, they crest like a wave, and they recede. By watching the sensation closely, one discovers that pain is not a solid, unchangeable block of concrete, but a shifting, moving energy. It pulsates, it changes shape, Seeing this impermanence breaks the psychological rigidity that often accompanies chronic conditions. It fosters a sense of curiosity rather than dread. Let me see what this sensation is doing right now is a far more manageable state of mind than I wish this would stop. This technique also prevents the phenomenon of catastrophizing, which is a significant predictor of disability in chronic pain patients. Catastrophizing involves ruminating on the worst possible outcome, e.g., this pain means I will end up in a wheelchair. By forcing the mind to stay in the present moment via detailed observation of the sensation, the mind cannot jump to the catastrophic future. The practitioner learns to inhabit the now, and in the now, the sensation is usually bearable, even if unpleasant. This practice builds immense psychological resilience. It proves to the individual that they can withstand the sensation without falling apart, rebuilding the self-efficacy that chronic pain often destroys. As we master this ability to observe without reacting, we prepare the ground for the fifth and final technique, which addresses the emotional relationship between the sufferer and their own body. Years of pain often create a relationship of enmity. The person feels betrayed by their body, leading to feelings of anger, shame, or even hatred toward the painful parts. This emotional toxicity further inflames the system. The final technique, aimed at repairing this relationship, utilizes the power of self-compassion and directed kindness to lower the inflammatory baseline of the organism. This moves us into the domain of loving-kindness meditation applied specifically to the somatic experience. The biological basis for this lies in the release of oxytocin and the reduction of cortisol. When we treat ourselves with harshness or frustration, we are internally stressing an already stressed system. When we introduce a tone of kindness, we actively soothe the threat response systems. The transition from the analytical labeling to the emotional loving kindness completes the circle of holistic pain management. We're not just treating a spine or a knee, we're treating a human being who is suffering. This technique involves generating a feeling of warmth and well-being, often starting with the self or a loved one to get the feeling flowing and then directing that warmth to the painful area. It sounds esoteric, but it is deeply physiological. It is the conscious application of the placebo effect mechanisms, which are real, potent neurobiological pathways by the patient themselves. It allows the older adult to say, even though this knee hurts, I care for it. I'm doing my best. This reduction in internal conflict is the final key to unlocking the body's natural healing potential and managing the chronic load of pain. Building upon the analytical precision of mindfulness and labeling, we arrive at the fifth and final pillar of our pain management protocol, which addresses the often overlooked emotional landscape of chronic suffering. Loving kindness meditation, or metta. While the term may initially sound foreign or overly sentimental to a pragmatic older generation, its clinical application is grounded in the hard science of psychoneuroimmunology. Chronic pain does not exist in a vacuum. It creates a hostile environment within the psyche. It is common for those suffering from persistent arthritis, sciatica, or neuropathy to develop an unconscious antagonism toward their own bodies. They view the painful hip as a traitor, a broken part that is ruining their life. This internal conflict triggers the release of stress hormones like cortisol and norepinephrine, which keep the nervous system in a state of high inflammatory alert. Loving kindness meditation is the antidote to this internal warfare. It functions as a biological signal of safety. When a practitioner directs thoughts of warmth, care, and gentleness toward a painful area, the brain releases oxytocin and endorphins. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, is not just for social connection. It has powerful anti-inflammatory properties and directly counteracts the effects of cortisol. To practice this, the older adult is guided to visualize the painful area not as a defect, but as a wounded part of the self that requires comfort, much like one would comfort a crying grandchild. Instead of gritting teeth in frustration, the instruction is to mentally whisper phrases of soothing intent, such as, "May this area be at ease," or I offer kindness to this sensation. This shifts the brain's orientation from threat detection to caregiving. Research indicates that this shift deactivates the threat response centers in the amygdala and lights up the left prefrontal cortex, an area associated with positive emotion and resilience. By consistently bathing the painful area in this attitude of acceptance and care, the subjective experience of pain softens. The sharp, jagged edges of suffering are dulled not just by the distraction, but by the chemical alteration of the emotional context in which the pain is perceived. It repairs the fractured relationship between the self and the body, allowing the individual to inhabit their physical form with dignity rather than resentment. This completes the suite of 5 techniques: breath for autonomic regulation, body scan for muscle release, visualization for neural distraction, mindfulness for cognitive separation, and loving kindness for emotional soothing. However, the possession of these tools is meaningless without a strategy for their implementation. The greatest barrier to meditation for the elderly is not ability, but the misconception that it requires long, disciplined periods of silence that interrupt the day. To counter this, we introduce the concept of microdosing meditation. Just as medicine is taken in specific doses throughout the day to maintain a therapeutic level in the bloodstream, meditation for pain management is most effective when applied in short, frequent bursts. We are not asking for a 30-minute session that leads to boredom or physical stiffness. Instead, we advocate for snacking on these techniques. This approach leverages the concept of Hebbian learning. Neurons that fire together, wire together. By integrating these techniques into existing daily habits, the brain begins to associate specific cues with a relaxation response, eventually making pain relief a reflex rather than a chore. The strategy begins the moment consciousness returns in the morning. The bookend strategy is highly effective here. The morning, often the time of greatest stiffness and pain due to immobility during sleep, serves as the first bookend. Before throwing off the covers and rushing into the day, the senior is invited to spend just 2 minutes in bed performing the body scan or breath awareness. This prehabbing of the nervous system lowers the morning cortisol spike and prepares the muscle for movement. It sets a neural tone of calm control rather than frantic reaction. The second bookend occurs at night, just before sleep. Pain is a notorious thief of sleep, and the fear of not sleeping often keeps the brain alert, amplifying the pain. Utilizing the safe haven visualization or the 4-7-8 breathing technique in bed signals the brain that it is safe to power down, facilitating the transition into the restorative phases of sleep where tissue repair occurs. Between these 2 bookends, the day offers countless opportunities for stealth meditation. We encourage the integration of practice into waiting moments, waiting for the kettle to boil, waiting for a commercial break on television to end, or waiting in a doctor's waiting room are all prime opportunities for 60 seconds of conscious breathing or a quick check-in with the shoulders and jaw to release tension. This transforms dead time into healing time. It also gives the patient a sense of agency. Instead of being a passive victim of the weight or the pain, they're actively doing something beneficial for their health. Furthermore, we must address the rescue protocol for flare-ups. Chronic pain is rarely a flat line. It has peaks and valleys. When a spike in pain occurs, perhaps after a misstep or a change in weather, the instinct is to panic. Panic leads to shallow breathing and muscle guarding, which increases the pain. The elderly patient is trained to use these techniques as an emergency brake. At the first sign of a flare-up, instead of reaching immediately for the pill bottle, though medication has its place, they reach for the breath. They stop, sit, and perform 3 minutes of resonant frequency breathing. This blunts the sharp rise of the sympathetic nervous system response, preventing the pain from spiraling out of control. It empowers the individual to realize that they have an internal volume knob they can adjust. The long-term goal of this microdosing approach is structural neuroplasticity. We are aiming to prune away the neural highways of chronic pain and cultivate the dirt roads of relaxation until they become superhighways. This takes time, and managing expectations is crucial. The older adult must understand that meditation is not morphine. It does not erase the source of the pain instantly. It is more like physical therapy for the brain. The results are cumulative. A week of practice may yield a 5% reduction in the unpleasantness of pain. A month may yield 10% and improve sleep. 6 months can fundamentally alter the trajectory of their later years. It is a practice of patience and persistence. We must also address the skepticism that often comes with age. I've lived this long without it. Why start now? The answer lies in the quality of life. Longevity is a triumph of modern medicine, but enjoying those extra years is a triumph of self-care. These techniques offer a way to reclaim the energy that is currently being siphoned off by the constant, low-grade stress of managing pain. When the brain is no longer exhausted by the processing of pain signals, that cognitive energy becomes available for other things: connecting with family, pursuing hobbies, learning new skills, or simply enjoying a sunset without the filter of suffering. This is the true promise of pain management. It is not just about the absence of hurting, it is about the presence of living. By demystifying meditation, stripping it of its esoteric trappings, and presenting it as a series of sophisticated, scientifically validated cognitive exercises, we make it accessible to everyone, regardless of their cultural or religious background. We are handing the controls back to the pilot. The aging body may have its limitations, its wear and tear, its history etched in bone and tissue, but the mind remains a frontier of limitless potential. The ability to shape one's own neural reality is not the privilege of the young. It is a fundamental human capacity that endures as long as there is breath. In conclusion, the journey of managing chronic pain through meditation is a journey from helplessness to empowerment. It acknowledges the biological reality of pain while refusing to be defined by it. Through the disciplined, gentle application of breath awareness, body scanning, visualization, mindfulness, and loving-kindness, the older adult can rewrite the story of their twilight years. They learn that while they may not be able to cure the arthritis in their hands or the stenosis in their spine, they can cure the suffering in their minds. They can close the gate on pain and open the door to peace. This is not a denial of old age. It is a mastery of it. As the science of neuroplasticity confirms, it is never too late to change the mind, and in doing so, change the experience of the body. The path to relief is closer than the medicine cabinet. It is as close as the next conscious breath.